Hello, and welcome to another episode of Boundless Body Radio. I'm your host, Casey Ruff, and today we have another amazing guest to introduce to you now. Dr. Caryn Zinn is a registered dietitian and a senior lecturer at AUT University in New Zealand. Her research and clinical practice work focuses on the whole food, low carbohydrate, healthy fat nutritional approach and its application to metabolic health and sports performance. After spending her career following conventional nutritional wisdom with her practice and research, she had to pivot and has changed her mind and flipped the food pyramid upside down. She is the co author of three books, which include What the Fat, Fats In, Sugars Out, How to Live the Ultimate Low Carb, Healthy Fat Lifestyle, and What the Face, How to Look and Feel Good from the Inside Out. With over 25 years of experience, Caryn's mission is to change the world and spread the whole food message to improve global health. You can find Dr. Caryn Zinn at www.whatthefatbook.com or at www.carynzinn.com. Dr. Caryn Zinn, what an absolute honor it is to welcome you to Boundless Body Radio.
Thank you very much. Lovely to meet you, Casey. Or should I say kia ora from Aotearoa, New Zealand.
Oh, interesting. I love that. That's interesting that you led with that. I was just thinking back at the gym that I used to work at, we had these specific treadmills that had a big screen. And I thought it was kind of lame at first, but actually it was really cool. When you were walking, you could choose different places on Earth, and it would like take you on this like kind of virtual hike through all these different places. And there weren't many different locations. There were some in southern Utah, which you just told me you've spent some time in. So those are kind of cool because those are just in my backyard a
Yeah.
few hours away. But one of the other places where I could go would be New Zealand. And whether I was doing walks up these hills or just walking around downtown Auckland, oh my goodness, it is absolutely gorgeous down there.
It is gorgeous. And I must say, hats off to those people who create those technologies that allow you to wander through different countries when you're not actually there and give you a little bit of a taster. So
Totally.
now I guess you want to get here. Our
Yeah,
borders are open now, so come on in.
great. Great. That sounds awesome. Yeah, I don't know what it is about the town Auckland. It just seems like it's really modern, but it has this like really charming kind of feel at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, Auckland is the biggest kind of most populous area in New Zealand, of course. And it's got lots of amazing things about it. It's the outskirts of Auckland that is most appealing. But I have to say, the South Island, Queenstown, Wanaka, all around that area, and the north of the North Island. Actually, there's so many different places in New Zealand that makes it an amazing place to live and to visit.
Wow, that's
There's just
amazing.
like hidden gems everywhere.
That's amazing. Yeah, that seems like it might be worth taking the very long and arduous trip to get down there.
Absolutely, and then because it is a long and arduous trip, while you're here, you might as well stay here for a little while.
Yeah. Yeah, I know a lot of people do that. One of my
Yeah.
favorite actually analogies of the ketogenic diet, when somebody is switching over, is to imagine like a long trip that's like that. Like when you're traveling to some place, like Bali or New Zealand or, Australia or whatever, you're going to have to go through this long trip. And that's going to take several flights, lots of layovers. It's going to be a
Mhm.
huge pain and you're going to wait in line with a bunch of stinky people. And that part's not very pleasant. But once you get to your destination, it's really heavenly and it's amazing. And unlike Bali or New Zealand, you can stay there as long as you like once you get into the kind of ketogenic world. And I think I found that analogy to be kind of helpful in the beginning when somebody's suffering through the adaptation phases of going on a ketogenic diet. It can be really miserable.
That is a really, really good analogy. The light at the end of the tunnel analogy. I like it. I really like
Yeah.
it.
I get bummed out when people, bail after it's been like a week or two and they say like, oh, I've got headaches or this is really uncomfortable. I'm craving sugar. And it's like, you were on your last leg to get to New Zealand. You were almost there. You should have just stuck with it. Like stick with it.
Yeah.
It'll be worth it. Yeah.
Yeah, and
I
there are
don't know.
things you can do. I just don't know if people get symptoms for longer than a week. I'm just not sure that they're doing it properly, to be fair.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think when I was starting this and going down this path and this journey, we did have people that were, taking 2 weeks, 3 weeks, really long times to adapt. And I think that was the fault of myself, the coach, like not understanding how to transition somebody through that properly. Because you're right, like maybe somebody will have a bad day or two when they're first getting started now, but it seems to be a lot easier. And I think we've learned a lot. I certainly have learned a lot, doing
Absolutely.
this for the last few years. Well, very interesting. You have a really cool story. You're actually not from New Zealand, if I understand that correctly. Can you tell us a little bit about your history and how you got interested in health?
Yeah, correct. So I am from South Africa, from the beautiful Cape Town, and I'll need to sing its praises as much as I sang New Zealand's praises. Cape Town is just a stunner. So I'm a very, very lucky lady to live in two beautiful places in the world. I did my my undergraduate study, my Bachelor of Science in Physiology and my dietetics training in Cape Town. And then after that, I immigrated to New Zealand, where I worked in the winterless north, a place called Whangarei, and I worked as a public health dietitian. And I was a very a very loyal dietitian to the cause. And I guess maybe during my day of study, it was quite different to the study of today. And I'm associate professor at AUT, and I teach, and I know the inquisitive nature of our students these days. But back then, I would just absorb what my lecturers told me, and I never questioned anything. There was no reason to question the guidelines. Why would they possibly be wrong? I'm just being taught them, and it made perfect sense to me. So that was kind of my world. Then when I came to New Zealand, I worked in public health for quite a while. So looking at trying to address the health problems of the north of the North Island, which is rife with type 2 diabetes. So very interesting job there. And then at the start of 2000, I moved to Auckland and got my job as an academic, and then I did my master's, my PhD, and cut a long story short, that was 22 years ago, and I'm still there actually. And while I'm still there, I have very, very different philosophies now to when I started there. So yeah, I mean, it was a bit of a journey. It was a big journey actually, switching my philosophies from kind of the loyal food pyramid girl to something which resembled turning the food pyramid upside down almost, and changing my philosophies. And that was kind of 8-9 years ago. And the weird thing is, it almost seems like it's mainstream-ish now. And we wrote some books, as you mentioned. We actually got a total of 5 books. That's not totally known, because a
Oh,
couple
wow.
weren't really were more kind of local. But I almost feel that in the context of low carb, whole food, and health, I almost feel like we've ridden the wave, and it's becoming mainstream now, which is the whole purpose of what we're trying to do, which is pretty awesome. But it was a bit of a rocky journey along the
Yeah.
way.
Yeah, it definitely can be, I think, for all of us as we're learning and kind of redirecting as we go. We were fortunate enough to host both Dr. Gary and Belinda Fetke not too long ago. And they
Hmm.
told me something that I kind of knew, but I guess I didn't really consider how bad it was. He said the South Pacific really is the hotbed of all kinds of metabolic disease and obesity in particular. And I think he said it was like 9 out of the top 10 most obese countries are found in the South Pacific. I think that's what he was saying. That either way, that's pretty challenging. And it sounds like when you first came many years ago to New Zealand, you were already noticing that people were dealing with a lot of obesity and type 2 diabetes.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, in a small country like New Zealand, when you look at the stats, obesity is the third. It's the third highest obesity rate, or it's the third country with the highest obesity rate in the world. And type 2 diabetes is very much just behind there. We're catching up very, very quickly in that space. And it is when you look at the demographics, you look at the ethnicity breakdown, it is the groups like the Maori and Pacific Island, the indigenous groups, that are disproportionately affected. And that is the reason for that. There's so many different reasons for that. One of the reasons for that is that particularly the Maori people, they don't necessarily align with the same way of health delivery as New Zealand European people do. So we get sick, we go to the doctor, and we get fixed, or sometimes we don't get fixed, or whatever. But for some of the indigenous people, there's a bit of a lack of trust in the Western way of doing things. And you go to the doctor and you've got 15 minutes. I mean, what is that even? what is that about? 15 minutes. What can you do in 15 minutes? And as one of the many reasons why Indigenous groups can't really get ahead is because they use different philosophical models of health, and we need to really change things up if we want to get some traction in terms of reducing inequalities and improving the situation. So there's a lot of work to do in the general space, but also even more work to do in this kind of Indigenous space. And I think that's echoed in different countries in the world, and in Australia as well.
I was just thinking that it sounds like the same kind of racial inequalities that are happening all over the planet in many places, but maybe just for slightly different reasons. Here in America, maybe it's the African American community, the Black community. We've completely lost trust. With the public health message here because of the horrible history of public health with minorities. And so maybe
Yeah.
it's a slightly different reason, but it sounds like something that's really pervasive around the world.
It is. And, even if you don't necessarily agree with it, you might say, oh, just come on, just go to the doctor and get yourself some help. It's accessible to everyone. So that's the key. We think it's accessible to everyone. But if it doesn't align with their philosophies, it's not accessible. And they're not going to,
That's right.
they're not going to take up the opportunities that are provided there. So whether it's right or wrong, or whether you agree with it or not, that is the reality. We need to work quite differently to get some good outcomes, I think.
Yeah, I agree. I look at somebody like, a Day Fox, known as the Black Carnivore here in America, or Dr. Tony Hampton. These people have embraced the low carbohydrate message, and now they're out sharing it. And they have a different voice than I have. It's very different, if you're in that community, to hear the message from me than it is for them. And so the more people that can help embrace that message for their, community, I think is so helpful.
Absolutely. And there's a big drive here at the moment to increase the Indigenous workforce, particularly in the area of health coaches. So it makes a lot of sense to have people going into their own communities, talking to their own people in their own language, with their own analogies and philosophies and things, and getting traction. So I think to be honest, I think the whole health delivery system is broken in New Zealand for, say, type 2 diabetes anyway, but potentially in the rest of the world as well. And we've been really lucky enough. I've been putting in research grants for for years and years and years. And since 2016, I've been putting in this research grant about low carb and diabetes. And it's finally 2022, it's finally been granted. So we've got some money from the government for the Health Research Council to look at the way the delivery of services in primary care, so at the medical centers, is delivered in the area of pre-diabetes and type 2 diabetes. So we're going to be evaluating some work that we've been doing with various GPs around the whole kind of low carb space and community facing and supportive initiatives space. And we're going to evaluate that and then roll it out to a bigger region and do a big evaluation there, compare it to their kind of standard practice, and then see how it goes, and hopefully roll it out to as much of New Zealand as that wants it. And these medical centers that we've been working with, they've been employing health coaches. So everyone gets a role. The doctor has a certain role. The health coach has a more hands-on role by, taking the community to the supermarket, doing cooking demonstrations, being responsive to them on text, on call, whenever they need to. So I just think everyone's got a role to play, but it's just we're working on an old system to try and fix these new problems.
Wow. That's amazing. I mean, I very often get very discouraged by how slowly this is moving, but I am starting to hear more and more that things are moving forward just a little bit. Even things like, the American Diabetes Association, I believe it was 2019, for the first time at least acknowledged that low carbohydrate could be a possibility to use, which is all anybody in this world that I know is asking for. So maybe we've turned a corner. Maybe the momentum has gained, so much ground that now it can actually move forward a little faster than it was in the past.
You are exactly right. And, America does lead the way. And, if the American guidelines, or the diabetes guidelines, or the diabetes agencies endorse low carb, and even extreme low carb, so essentially ketogenic diets, as the most efficacious way to reduce HbA1c and reduce medication in patients with prediabetes and type 2 diabetes, the rest of the world sits up and listens and goes, oh, okay, well, there must be something to this. And then, other countries around the world suddenly are coming around. So now, when I used to do talks for health professionals and communities 8 years ago, the first half an hour you'd have to spend trying to convince them why it was a good idea. And now the talks are about how do we best incorporate this to get the best outcomes, because it's, like I said, it's almost like mainstream. It is adopted as one of the therapeutic tools to use for those who want to and those who embrace it. So I think we have definitely come a long way, considering, as you say, the snail's pace that guidelines usually move at. But even just, New Zealand's a small country, and when I get clients, so I've got a clinical practice as well. When I get clients, I always ask them how they got to me, or how they were referred to me. And they go, oh, my doctor referred me. Oh, who's your doctor? And they mention the name. And in the old days, I would know all the doctors who would refer a client to me to do low carb, but now I've never heard of these names. So it is definitely moving at a reasonable pace in New Zealand anyway. So it's very, very pleasing to see.
That's amazing. I think back on the statement that you just said, which is like taking people with type 2 diabetes or pre-diabetes and reversing the disease or getting
Yeah,
them off of medications. What, 98% of doctors that you mentioned that to would be like, what are you talking about? That is impossible. This
yeah.
is a chronic disease that you will manage poorly, probably, for the rest of your life.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, chronic, progressive, debilitating disease, and something that, the Indigenous families just get. This is just something that your families get. It's nonsense. And I think using words like reversal and remission are becoming mainstream words, which is so good. And people are actually going, oh, well, everyone knows the word remission, right? In a cancer context, when you say the word remission, you go, oh, okay, that's good. So using the word remission in the diabetes context is really good, and reversal is just absolutely fabulous. And I just think people are stopping to go, oh, okay, this is somewhat different to what we thought it was, and potentially how we thought we could best manage this. And it's
Yeah.
moving. There's traction. It's great.
Yeah, that is incredible. I know he's retired now, but all of these things could have prevented, Dr. Gary Fettke from amputating less toes and less legs and all those terrible, terrible complications that come with type 2 diabetes. Horrible.
Absolutely. I mean, Gary's story is always very interesting, and it's one that's quite sort of close to home for me, because he was making a whole lot of noise in his kind of workplace, in his area. And I think the people that went up against him were the dietitians. So, when we first got into this, I was probably one of the first dietitians to kind of switch and be more kind of embracing of this way. And I know, being a conservative dietitian, we very much protection of the patch. So that's the problem with kind of silos. You get trained as a dietitian, and you are the only people who can talk about nutrition and can talk about food. Even, the personal trainers are not allowed to talk about nutrition. I mean, how ridiculous is that?
Wow.
The orthopedic surgeons, you're not trained in nutrition. And it's true, they're not trained in nutrition, but there is such a thing called upskilling, which was, so when the dietitians were saying to him, this is not your area, this is our area, and you can't be telling patients that. I was thinking, I get it from their perspective. They're going, this is our area. Dietitians have never ever been, I don't think dietitians have ever really been valued. And over the years, you can see how they operate. They're constantly trying to create value for their work. And for whatever reason, it just hasn't quite got there. And I do think the dietetic profession needs to sort of not step aside, but morph in terms of what they're able to do. And I think that maybe being involved in some of that upskilling and train the trainer and train other people and help other people to deliver a sound message. So rather than going, this is my patch, this is my patch, it's like everyone should be talking about nutrition, probably at different levels so that we don't overstep our boundaries. Let us as a profession help the health system move in this positive direction. And oh gosh, if we could only get there, it would be fabulous. But the fact that we're not there indicates that there's plenty more work to do, which is good.
Yeah, that is good. I love that point. I think that's so valuable to acknowledge that all of us, at different levels can talk about this. We're in this world where you can learn from other places. This is a free podcast. You can access this all over the world. Like, this is a great place where you can learn. There's lots of great podcasts out there where I learned a bunch of this stuff. Like, you can find good information.
Absolutely. And I mean, think about it. The dietetic service, like the dietitians are in short supply, they work in hospitals, they work in private. If you go and see a private dietitian, it will cost you a lot of money. And you might see them once every now and again. If you've got an injury and you go to your physio, you probably see them once a week or maybe even a couple of times a week for a few weeks. What a good avenue to get some health messages in there, some nutrition, some lifestyle, some messages, just with little sound bites. But oh no, physios aren't allowed to talk about nutrition because they're not trained in the area. So it could be done so much better, with the dietitian still having a really, really important role, if not more important than what they've got at the moment.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I love that point. Okay, I want to talk about how you have been able to make a low carbohydrate or a ketogenic approach really easy and approachable. Your book definitely makes it so easy to understand, so easy to adapt, and makes it delicious. And it doesn't have to be this thing that people think of when they think of a really, restrictive low carbohydrate diet. I want to talk about that. But before we do, I would love to contrast what your work was like, especially work in like public health before you learned about low carbohydrate and ketogenic diets. Can you tell us a little bit about like maybe some frustration that you were feeling, or what like the normal was, how you would help people or try to help people, and what the success rate was?
I mean, my world is sort of divided into my academic world and then my practice world. And before that, it was public health. So, running programs, delivering programs to improve outcomes, those sort of things you never really see. You can't really measure your work on a kind of national scale. If you run a program for 30 people in a rural community, it's like, well, if they eat a bit better, you don't really know what's going to happen down the track. So that's why working in health promotion is so blooming frustrating, because you kind of don't really know if you're doing any I mean, you're not doing any harm, but you can't really see what's going on long term. In the clinical world, that's when you can really see, and I know people poo-poo the whole N=1, but if you take N=1 and you multiply that by 1,000,000, well, you've got a lot of good outcomes there. But the most interesting thing for me is that when I was doing my normal, so I was working with sports teams and with the general population, telling them to eat things like the usual stuff like whole grain breads and cereals. And I worked with one of the national sports team, the rugby league sports teams, the Warriors, and they were sponsored by Aunt Betty's creamed rice, so canned creamy rice, and they used to literally drink this stuff. And I would go, yeah, it's got 80 grams of carbohydrate and 10 grams of protein. That's really what you want to do. And gosh, looking back, I feel almost, I'm just horrified at what that actually means for dental health, number one, all the sugar going on in the teeth, and for long-term health. But I'm digressing a little bit. In a private practice setting, when I would do weight loss, or I'd get clients and they want to try and improve their health, and I'd tell them to eat whatever whole grain breads and cereals, and 6 times a day, snacking and all that kind of stuff. When it comes to weight loss, you can literally do anything and lose weight. You can go high carb, low carb, vegan, carnivore, green carb, blue carb, whatever. If you're in calorie deficit, and I know there's an argument around that, but for the most part, if you are in calorie deficit, you will lose weight. And if you can stick to that, then you will maintain weight. And there's good evidence to show that. So from a weight loss perspective, I absolutely used to get successful weight loss doing it the other way. But the massive difference is all the other things that you get. So now in my world, weight loss is almost like a pleasant side effect that you get from reduced inflammation, from improved wellness, sleeping better, feeling better, conditions going down, medications dropping, blood pressure dropping. So it's a very, very different world. So in the old days, yep, I get success with weight loss and not a whole lot else. Apart from the, LDL cholesterol comes down, we know there's a bigger story there. And now the range of positive outcomes that you get on low carb, whether it's moderately low carb or more strict low carb, you still get such amazing outcomes that it's like a chalk and cheese delivery. And this is one of the reasons why, for the first time, for many doctors, for many general practitioners, for the first time in a lot of their careers, they are getting job satisfaction, right? So instead of going, write out a prescription for this and, go away and come back in 3 months for the repeat prescription, they're actually going, right, well, let me give a different service. It's around low carb. They do the whole low carb thing, and the client comes back and they go, oh my God, doctor, I'm feeling amazing, and my HbA1c's come down, my blood sugar control is beautiful. And the doctor goes, oh my God, this is the first time I'm actually feeling good about what I'm doing. So you can see why this immediate positive effect in all areas of people's lives is bringing kind of positivity and benefit to not only patients and clients, but health professionals as well, all round.
Yeah, no, that's such a great point. I love that. And we hear that story so many times. That was certainly my case, working as a personal trainer. And I love how you called it like the N of one. It's like, yeah, if I'm giving somebody something and it's not working for them or the other people or anybody else I work with, it's either all these people really suck or my advice is really bad. And we have to
Yeah.
like reconcile that. I do
Yeah.
want to point out real quick though, you were working with New Zealand rugby players. Did they not have any suspicion about somebody from South Africa giving them advice? Like you may have
That's
weaseled in there, and
That's
I
a
don't
good
know.
that's a good point. No, it was rugby league. It was rugby league.
Got it.
So
Got it.
a different sporting code, but well, there's got to be an element of trust, right?
That's right. I had to just point that out. Okay, so awesome. So tell us, when was it that you actually first encounter the ketogenic diet the first time?
Yeah. So probably around 8 or 9 years ago. So you'd be familiar with Professor Tim Noakes from South
Of
Africa,
course.
right?
Yep, of
So
course.
so I've had a lot to do with him over the years. So he actually taught me exercise science in my undergrad, in my dietetics.
Amazing.
I know,
Wow.
it was classic. And it was probably about, I don't know, 15 years ago now. He was making a lot of noise about fluid guidelines for endurance athletes, right? And
That's right.
the guidelines always 750 mils. You drink 750 mils on the hour every hour, and that will deliver blah de blah de blah. And the guideline was, if you're thirsty, well, you're really dehydrated, and that's not good. So it's already too late. And suddenly he was talking about this drink to thirst message, right? And people like me and dietitians around the world like, drink to thirst, my God, it's already too late. What is he talking about? Has he gone crazy? And it was in the context of hyponatremia, where ultra endurance athletes overdrink, and they get sodium levels that are too low in the blood, and that can be catastrophic, can be fatal, and it has been. So he was pushing this drink to thirst and work out your own guidelines and get away from the 750 mils on the hour every hour. Like, oh my God, he's going crazy. And then a couple of years later, the ACSM guidelines changed, and there was a drink to thirst, and there was the onus is now put on the athlete to weigh yourself before and after, and it more intuitively work out what your fluid intake is, rather than this one guideline for everyone. And when that guideline came into play, hyponatremia, almost disappeared.
Wow.
So someone who makes a noise about something that sounds a bit weird and wonky in the first place, but actually if you sort of watch it play out, it had a really positive effect. So when he started making noise about low carb and ketogenic diets, I was kind of thinking in my head, oh, this is Atkins, we've seen it all before. It's, it's not good. It puts you in this thing called ketosis, which is bad for you, and all the stuff that came around. But because it was him making noise, I kind of thought, there must be something to this, because he's a smart cookie. He's a very, very well respected scientist. So that's how I first sort of, my ears pricked up about it. And then a colleague of mine at work who was a co-author in the book that we wrote, was talking to me one day at AUT and said to me, I want to talk to you about the whole low carb thing. I'm like, oh God, not you. And I was still trying to process, and I was trying to make it go away, because it was just against everything that I'd ever, learned and believed, and was teaching students. And he said to me, this is Professor Grant Schofield, he says to me, so Caryn, tell me, type 2 diabetes, people with type 2 diabetes have got, type 2 diabetes is characterized by insulin resistance, isn't it? Yeah, it is. And at the time we had just picked up a PhD student who was looking at hyperinsulinemia and insulin resistance, Dr. Casman Crofts. Anyway, so he was exploring this science and saying to me, so type 2 diabetes, insulin resistance is a connection. Yep. So insulin resistance is kind of when you're, there's an excess of insulin in the body, and it's kind of doing the same job to blood sugar, but it's distributing blood sugar around the body, but it's doing it at a higher level. And you could say that the body is kind of intolerant to carbohydrate, because the body's got to work much harder to clear the carbohydrates from the system. I'm going, yeah. What are you getting at? What's the point? So then how come the dietitians prescribe a high carbohydrate diet for people with type 2 diabetes if this is the very thing that they're having problems with processing around their body? And that kind of was like it literally punched me in the stomach. I'm like, oh, there must be a good reason. Let me go and find out. And of course I came up with, well, there's, you need your healthy whole grains, you need your vitamins and minerals and your fiber and your everything, from your food groups. And then I thought, no, there's something not quite right here. And when it all came out that the whole, food group distribution was largely an exercise around a table by a bunch of people many years ago, looking at the RDIs or RDAs from America, recommended daily intakes of nutrients, they went, okay, so the RDI of say vitamin B1 is whatever, where are we going to get that from? Oh, whole grains. So it was just like an exercise that covered all the food groups, rather than saying you need all your nutrients, your micronutrients, you can get them from wherever you want, provided you get them and provided you get enough fiber. Does it really matter if it's from lots of carbohydrate or a little carbohydrate? So it was at that time where my whole kind of philosophies and thinking pattern changed, and this was sort of November, December, and I went away for my Christmas holiday thinking, I think I've got to get out of the profession, because this is literally too much for me. Like, I didn't know what to do with myself. And then I came back, I just tried it out myself, came back, and then started to do this in my practice, and felt pretty anxious. The first client that I had that told them to reduce carbohydrate and to have full fat milk, and then then you get great outcomes, and you realize that this is actually good, it's safe, it's whatever. So that was the transition. So it's about 8-9 years ago that I got into the space, and to be fair, I don't work in the ketogenic space a lot. I work in the low carb space. So ketogenic, absolutely, for people with certain cancers, particularly brain cancer, concussion, migraine, epilepsy, for sure. And for those people who want to be more extreme, and can sustain that longer term, that's fine. And also for athletes at various cycles of their kind of the training strategies and whatever. So you'd go ketogenic for certain periods of time. But for most of my clients, I work in the low carb space because I find that you can achieve a lot in the low carb space, great outcomes, and it tends to be more achievable long term.
That is such a great point. And I certainly have made the mistake of throwing that term around a lot in this interview. And we do it
Mm-hmm.
all the time. We
Mm,
confuse keto with ketosis. We confuse keto with the ketogenic diet, or what the ketogenic diet even is, and with low carb. And it's all in the space of, low carb. I love Dr. Fetke did the same thing in the introduction where it said low carbohydrate, healthy fat. It's not high
mm,
fat. The
mm,
way we first said it's healthy fats, including those healthy
absolutely.
fats. But we don't do, I don't think we do a great job distinguishing the different levels. So can you explain a little bit more about the difference between low carb versus ketogenic versus even something like a carnivore or no carb diet?
Yeah, so I guess we'll start with sort of standard, say, American guidelines or New Zealand Ministry of Health guidelines, where your carbohydrate requirements are between 45 and 65% of your total energy. And that typically can work out to be 250 grams plus. And that's what's kind of recommended. We'll go to the one extreme of the ketogenic diet. The ketogenic diet is where you take your carbohydrates to below sort of 20 or 30 grams of net carbs per day. That is very, very low. And typically, if you want to, if you're doing very, very strict keto, say for epilepsy, your fat percentage is going to be up at like 80%. And that what that will do is put you in a state of nutritional ketosis. So it will mean that not only is your body using fat as a fuel, but also your brain is now switching from a glucose fuel source to a ketone fuel source. And of course, when ketones are used by the brain, there is you do get cognitive benefit from that, and that is one of the reasons why the ketogenic diet therapeutically is so good for conditions where fuel utilization in the brain is kind of, there's a question mark around it, right? So something's happening with glucose fuel utilization, and actually by switching to fat or ketone utilization, there's an improvement. Nowadays, even for epilepsy, you can do a more modified, they call it a modified Atkins, where you keep the carbs as low, but the fat doesn't necessarily have to be as high, but you still achieve nutritional ketosis. So you've got the one extreme and the other extreme, and then in the middle, in the gray middle, there's that kind of moderately low and low carb space. Typically, everyone's got their own kind of definition. The one sort of definition that's come from the literature from Richard Feynman is under 130 grams of carbohydrate per day. That is considered a low carb diet. Some people say, again, in the literature, when you look at the studies, anything under 45% of total energy is considered low carb, but that could still be, like
That could
200.
still be a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. So I don't work with percentages typically with my clients. I sit in that space. It depending on what their goal is. I might say if someone is type 2 diabetic, and they've got a family, and they've got lots of stuff going on in their life, and they're not one of these people who just wants to go keto, I would say, try and sit between the 50 and 75 or 50 and 80 grams per day. It's still really low, and
Yeah.
you might sort of go in and out of a mild level of ketosis, but that's absolutely fine. And as long as the person is achieving their goal in terms of improving their blood sugar control and losing weight if they need to lose some weight, then why do they have to go as extreme as keto? I don't know. I find that I get a lot of clients come and see me, and they go, I've been on the keto diet before and it really worked for me. And then I'd say, well, then what are you doing talking to me here? What's it, and they go, oh, it's just a bit extreme. And I did it really well. It was really awesome for like a month or two. And then I fell off. They just don't know how to moderate. So that low carb space, I think, is really good. I mean, with any approach that you go on, you've got to watch the creep. you've really got to watch the creep. You've got to watch the creep in everything, even people who are strict.
Yeah.
Having a check-in with themselves or people or others, health professionals, is really a good idea for people who can't necessarily, get it under control themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then you've got carnivore, which is interesting. So that's like close to no carbohydrate, depending on how you define it. And again, carnivore, some people just say it's meat and meat products. Other people say, well, actually, it's dairy as well. And then other people say, well, once you've sort of done what you need to do, you can sort of bring a little bit of vegetables here and there. It's like, well, that's not the carnivore diet. That's like the modified carnivore diet. So I think everything's kind of creeping. And I really think that people need to find what works for them, whether it's, different proportions of meat and vegetables. I don't know. All I know is that a whole food approach, choosing foods that are minimally processed, is the most important thing. Protein is incredibly important, and particularly for, over the age of 40, protein becomes more important for athletes, for adolescents. Protein is really important. And carbohydrate is about, keeping it in a spectrum where you need to put it, depending on your goal, and looking at the best quality carbohydrate. And I think if you've got that covered and you really pay attention to nutrient density, then that's the battle won.
I mean, I've heard you talk about this in the past where it's like if you're going for those whole foods, you are probably going to be in that low carbohydrate space anyway. You'd have to like really try hard, almost like eating tons of fruit, which even then would be tough because there's so much fiber and things filling you up, that it would be really challenging to be above about 150 grams a day.
Yeah,
Hmm.
absolutely, because there is that whole, if you just eat whole food, well, like, what is the definition of whole food? Well, that's another kind of open up a can of worms. It's, is yogurt whole food? Because it is still minimally processed. Well, I mean, I consider it whole food, but then other people wouldn't. You can't really go out into a forest and catch a yogurt, so there is an element of of totally, unprocessed and then minimally processed that gets included in the brief. Everyone makes up their own rules, but whole grain bread is not whole food, because it's made in a factory. And I think when you go from making stuff in your kitchen to making stuff in a factory, the food quality and the level of processing is different. Then becomes a different thing.
Yeah, that's so interesting. So for me personally, I prefer to stay more on the strict side, although it's interesting. I consider myself being on the carnivore diet for the last 3.5 years or so. But when you're saying the level of carbohydrate to be in deep ketosis, 20 to 30 grams, I'm probably exceeding that. I mean, I use condiments from time to time. I drink coffee. Sometimes I'll have a beer. Like those things like that isn't necessarily carnivore. And that's probably more than 30 grams of carbohydrate for sure. But
Yep.
but I love the approach that you take where it's like you don't need to be this strict. You can get really good results, include some carbohydrates in the diet, and just adjust accordingly based on your needs.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just getting back to your point there, I do think people who are well adapted, and fat adaptation is this thing that happens over time. We don't know the exact day that it takes place. But we know that some people who are, metabolically well regulated, have been in ketosis, adapted, have had those mitochondrial adaptations for a very long time, can actually get away with staying in ketosis on a higher level of carbohydrate at times. So it's not a one size fits all. As long as you know what you're doing, why you're doing it, you're enjoying doing it, it's working for you, you're achieving your goals, and you are getting your nutrients, you're not doing anything that's harmful, well then, who cares if it's a carnivore or vegan or whatever.
Yeah, I love that. That's such a great point. And I know we've already kind of talked about this, but I would love to just reiterate when you're sitting down in front of somebody, there's going to be certain people that you can say you're going to be in the kind of 130, 150 grams of carbohydrate per day will probably be okay for you, versus another group of people where it's like, yeah, you should probably be 50, 60, 70. Again, can
Mhm.
you kind of reiterate which people do you think can do okay with more carbohydrate and other people that it's like, you know what, you probably can't?
Yeah, so that's a really interesting point, and it's a very, very gray area. And I do it based on kind of, I don't know, I take a good history from people. And before they come into my office, I do a good pre-screen form. I find out what their living situation is like, who cooks, who, how many kids they've got, if they've got kids, what sort of exercise they do, what sort of work they do, what sort of life they have, what they eat, how often they have takeaways, how often they have coffee, and I find out a lot about them, and then look at their medical history and look at what their goals are. And before I see them, my business is online now. Before I see them, I've got a lot of information already about them, and then a further sort of 20-minute conversation gets me to that place that I want to be at. I do want to say that I have some clients that I've only worked out over time need to be strict, need to be in that ketogenic space because they are truly addicted to sugar. Now, sugar addiction is a thing, right? The same as, an alcoholic can't have a drink on a Tuesday night and a Saturday night. They just cannot drink. They need to abstain. And people who have a proper sugar addiction can't have one biscuit as a treat on a Friday night. So in extreme levels of sugar addiction, some people can't even have so-called good quality carbohydrates. They can't even have some sweet potato or something, because that will send them down that sort of spiral into wanting more carbohydrate and eating more carbohydrate and causing harm. So it does depend a lot on personality, working out if you're dealing with a moderator, or you've got that kind of black and white personality. And sometimes, well, you can't get that typically on the first session. Sometimes you get that with a lot of going moderately low carb and just totally failing the whole time, and actually going, you know what, you actually need to be strict. And then they move to a more stricter ketogenic space and it works for them. I still have to be diligent. So that's the one thing. I think if you've got someone who's got a spouse and some kids and a big social life, hopefully most people have got lives, and let's say they have type 2 diabetes and they've got, say, 10, 15, 20 kilos to lose. And they go for holidays every now and again, like a lot of people do. I would put them in, and of course talking about what they've done before and what's worked for them and what hasn't worked for them, because that really leads to what this has worked for you, this hasn't worked for you before. That leads to what might work now. And I think for that, typical for that maybe middle-aged housewife with a family, or not necessarily housewife, but someone who's working or whatever, that 50 to 80, 50 to 75 might be a nice place. And I always say, look, on some days I get people to monitor their food intake on an app, so they can really get a good handle and take control and get empowered. And I say, well, if you sometimes go lower, if you're having a day where you do 20 grams, that's absolutely fine, but that's not the prescription. You don't have to do that every day. If you want to do a little bit of intermittent fasting, absolutely include that in. That will bring your overall carb down. So that could be a space that I work in with that type of client. I had a client the other day who's a CrossFitter, and interestingly, I worked with her. I worked with her several years ago, and she got into ketogenic space. She was just flying. She was amazing. And then I haven't had contact with her for a long time, and she made contact again. She said she just got back into CrossFit, and she went to see someone who she wanted to build muscle mass. She went to see someone who put her on a high carb diet, and she said she just feels terrible. She feels inflamed, she feels puffy, she feels heavy. So what we've done is we've gone back to the ketogenic space just to kind of reset. And then for her, because she's doing something like CrossFit, which really requires you to tap into that sort of glycolytic energy systems a little bit more, we wouldn't keep her in the ketogenic space. You'd bring her into a space where she's maybe going, some days she's on 30 or 40 grams of carbs, 50 grams of carbs. Other days she might be up to, say, 100 or even 120. So it's for highly active individuals, it's moving towards periodizing the carbohydrates to the session. So if you're doing a very, a heavy session, an important session, you might want to include a bit more carbohydrate for nutritional support around that session. And then other days where you're doing lighter sessions, you might not. And the disconcerting thing for a lot of people about that is that there's no textbook guideline about this. It's about sort of feeling your way, because they go, well, should I put the carbohydrate after my training or before my training? It's like, well, I don't know, let's see, put it after your training, see how you go, or put it before, let's see how you go. It's very much trial and error. And for some people that's disconcerting. I quite like the whole trial and error, because it takes away the one size fits all, and you're a problem solver and you're trying to find the best outcome. So again, just to come back to your question, someone who's trying to live a healthy lifestyle, got a family, trying to achieve some goals, got a busy life, you might put them in the 50 to 80, 50 to 100 maybe.
Yeah.
If you've got someone who's eating 500 grams of carbohydrate, then maybe getting them closer to 100 to 120 might be a good starting point. For someone
That's
who's
great.
a CrossFitter or someone who needs that glycolytic, you might sort of switch between keto and a slightly higher carb, depending on phases of training.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow, that is really well explained. I absolutely love that. I think that makes, this diet, this way of eating very approachable for lots of different people. And I love that you acknowledge all of those other things that is not just, grams or the weight of something or the calories of something. Like, you don't eat calories of something or grams of protein.
Mm,
You have food, you have meals, you
mm,
you have a family. Who's preparing your meals? Does little Johnny like what you make? Like, there's so
yeah,
many other things that go into it that need to be considered, and I'm so glad that you take all those into consideration. I think that's really helpful for the listener to realize that you can adjust this. It doesn't have to be the same whatever diet that somebody's putting up on Instagram. Just because they do it doesn't mean that low carbohydrate can't be accessible and can't
yeah,
work for you. And certain foods that might trigger some people might not trigger you, and you can be okay with that. And everybody is invited, and everybody can stand to benefit from whatever level. And you're right, like the guess and check thing I think is wonderful. It's frustrating in the world of nutrition to feel like we never have the thing,
for
and
sure.
we're always adjusting. But you're right, it does make it fun. It does make it an interesting case in problem solving. So I really love that approach.
Yeah, and there's also a wide variety of places where people can access information. Literally, some people can read a book, apply it, and that'll be them forever. Other people need to gather a whole lot more information. Other people need to have their, support teams around them. Other people need to go to a registered dietitian or nutritionist. Some people might go, well, I'm happy, I've got a good rapport with my personal trainer, I'm going to work with him or her. So I've got a client that she works with me, she works with a naturopath, she works with a psychologist, she's got a whole team around her to navigate through her issues. And it's really fabulous, that sort of multidisciplinary team. Every person has a different role to play, and as long as the client is, or the patient is at the center of everyone's thought patterns, then it can absolutely work.
Yeah, I love that. That's a really great approach. If you have the means and the resources to build a team around you, that's fantastic. I love it.
Mm.
Like we said earlier, what the fat is really approachable. It makes things easy. It makes things look delicious. Your recipe book looks amazing. Just seeing the avocado on the cover, like that looks really good. But I do want to make sure we talk about one of your more latest books, What the Face. Can you tell us a little about some of the things you learned about eating properly and things like skin health?
Yeah, I mean, this was an interesting book because it really tied together what we had done before. So, whole food, good quality carbohydrates, good quality protein, healthy fats. And we linked it to skin health. And the biggest learning curve for doing that book was looking at the relationship between the gut, the brain, and the skin. And you can't you can't separate it at all. And it's funny when people basically clean up their diet towards low carb whole food, they get lots of benefits. They get improvements in their gut health. They suddenly, if they've got skin issues, their skin issues tend to clear up. And they get this kind of cognitive enhancement. They lose their brain fog. So all of the systems in the body are totally connected. So we took this approach and applied it in the context of skin. We also went into cosmetics, what cosmetics you should and shouldn't use on your face, and what's the sort of basic regime you can do. We looked at the sort of skin microbiome. We looked at all sorts of things. And yeah, and there was a very big focus on the types of fats, and there was a session on there was a section on collagen, and looking at the science behind some of these supplements, whether they work, whether they don't work. So there was lots of learning there, lots of learning. Absolutely.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I don't think a lot of people make that connection. Not just skin, gut, brain connection, which is so strong. I don't know how many people I've worked with that they all improve together when somebody starts eating right. But the connection between the skin and the food that they're eating. What are some of the most beneficial foods that people can be eating for skin health?
I think it's the template of that whole food. So looking at good quality proteins, I mean, you look at the building blocks of the skin. You've got your collagen, elastin. You've got your three kind of sister proteins there that are really important for building optimal skin health. So good quality protein and enough protein. And I think, like I said earlier, protein doesn't really get it doesn't get the press it should do. I think in the old days we were so focused on, bodybuilders eat too much protein, and too much protein is so bad for the system, bad for the kidney, and bad for the whatever. And we've gone the other way, and particularly in the beginning with the whole ketogenic diet, you need to keep your protein intake low. But that has moved really, and now we're seeing a push towards optimal protein. Protein has got that added benefit of improving satiety. So good quality protein sources are really important for building healthy skin, but also the fats, particularly the omega-3 fats. So we talk a lot about the omega-3, omega-6 ratio, and something to avoid being seed oils, because they've got high omega-6, and you've got, there's some issues there with the ratio, but also they're kind of factory manufactured fats. So again, focusing on animal sources, but also plant sources as well of omega-3 fats. And yeah, so the fat and the protein were two major focuses, but also the micronutrients as well. And this might be a bit kind of antagonistic for the carnivore folk, but we do go into the importance of certain nutrients like biotin, and some of the other kind of lesser well-known micronutrients, and how important they are for optimal skin health and gut health.
Wow. No, that's great. You are the second person we've interviewed this week that is an expert in skin health and has told us that protein is the most important thing, and make sure you're getting adequate protein. Somebody sent me an article. So ridiculous. Somebody sent me an article this week and said, "Hey, what do you think about this?" And it was called something like "The 7 Signs That You're Eating Too Much Protein." And there were all like these ridiculous symptoms that I've never heard of, and was recommending for most adults they need to take in about I think it said like 53 grams of protein per day, and to like sub out things like get the animal fats out, get the animal protein out, make sure you're eating plenty of soy. It's like, oh my goodness, like I cannot believe what I'm reading out there as
Yeah,
far as protein
shocking.
goes. that
Yeah,
that that message has to die. Has to
absolutely.
die.
And I think that whole the RDI or the RDA of 0.8 grams per kilogram body weight. So if you're weighing if you're weighing I don't know, 60 kilos, that's sort of 50 odd grams of protein. I mean, I get that in my breakfast meal.
Absolutely.
And I think that that is way too low. And you only have to look at the powerlifting literature and the bodybuilding, well, not so much the bodybuilding, but the literature that looks at strength training individuals, where they've done those studies, and they've got the protein up to either 4.4, I think even 5.4 grams
Wow.
of protein per kilogram. So, someone who's 80 or 90 kilos, multiply that by 5.4, that's a lot of protein. And I'm
Yeah.
not saying that's an amount that I would tell people to eat, but the literature has looked at a range of health markers and have found that there is no insult to any of these markers with such high levels of protein. So it is a real myth. And I think there is some issues if you do have you've got pre-existing issues with your kidneys, you might think a little bit harder about it. You might get some help to not go that high, but I think in the general population, we need to not be scared of going up to 2 grams of protein per kilogram body weight, because also there's a discrepancy of the weight that you are now versus the weight that you want to be if you want to lose excess body fat. So I know in your neck of the woods, you tend to do it per pound of lean body mass. Or
Yeah.
you have to know what your lean body mass is, and
Yeah.
the average individual doesn't. So,
Yeah.
but anyway, bringing it back, I do think that that protein needs to be on the front stage a little bit more.
Yeah, agreed. Thank you so much. We just always love reiterating that message. I replied to this person like, this is a great way to make sure that you're going to waste muscle and have bone issues and end up in a nursing home at age 65, 70. Like
Yeah,
that's where you're heading if you're eating that kind of thing.
yeah,
Wow. Well, this
absolutely.
conversation has been absolutely amazing. I've really enjoyed learning from you. Dr. Caryn Zinn, where can people go to connect with you and your work?
Well, I guess I'm on the usual social media channels apart from Instagram, because I'm sort of old. um, Facebook, so Caryn Zinn. My website is carynzinn.com, and then Facebook, I'm Caryn Zinn Dietitian. Twitter is @Caryn Zinn. My dog has an Instagram page, but I do not,
What?
so don't look for me there.
That's
um,
hilarious.
yeah, and then I've got my sort of academic, my AUT, Caryn Zinn AUT Academic. You can just Google if you were interested in, what my publications are and anything like that.
Yeah,
So
excellent.
there are a range of places. Yeah.
Great. We will link to all of that in the show notes. I sometimes halfway joke that like we're just about ready to hire like a 13-year-old girl to run our social media accounts. Like it's so overwhelming and I do it so poorly. Yeah, it's really tough. That may have been the way to go, is just not even mess with Instagram or TikTok or anything like that. Just stick with Facebook where
Oh,
all the rest of
yeah.
us old people are.
I know, because it's just like another thing, right?
So,
Another thing. It's like, no.
yeah, totally, totally. Well, this is amazing. Again, Dr. Caryn Zinn, thank you so very much for sharing your time and your learnings with us. We're so grateful that you found this way of life and that you're sharing it with others in a way that's very simple to understand. And thank you so much for taking the time to be on our show today. We really appreciate you.
Thank you for having me. It's been great to be here chatting with you.
Yeah, such an honor. And this has been another episode of Boundless Body Radio.